Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Streamed and Screened, an entertainment podcast about movies and TV from Lee Enterprises. I'm Terry Lipschutz, a senior producer at Lee and co-host of the program with Bruce Miller, editor of the Sioux City Journal and a longtime entertainment reporter. Bruce, how's everything going?
You know, Ter, come on. I lived through the 80s, and now you've discovered something from the 80s that you're all excited about. You got a big kind of album collection, if you will, or what do they call box set?
Box set.
Is that the term they use? Are you young people using that term box set today, or is that just something from the old days? But it samples John Hughes movies.
That is correct.
Fill me in on it. Let's hear all about it, because the 80s are big. If you didn't know, the 80s are back, and we're going to relive them.
The 80s are back in a big way. So recently, this isn't a yesterday release. This came out in the late, I think it was pretty much for Christmas, that selling period. Life Moves Pretty Fast, the John Hughes mixtapes. It's a box set. It was released in England. They put out several configurations. There was like a 2 LP version of a condensed mix, 6 LPs, 4 CD box set, and then there was like a deluxe 4 CD box set that also had a 7-inch single and a cassette. But what it did was it collected the key tracks. It's not like complete soundtracks from each movie, but it's a lot of the key tracks from John Hughes movies of the 1980s. So we're talking 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller, and then it kind of brings everything up to Uncle Buck, which was released in 1989. So that was the last movie that they really sampled from. So there's nothing newer, none of the like Christmas tracks from Home Alone or any of those, but it's that huge period. And for me, you know, when I was probably 10 years old or so, my aunt took me to see Ferris Bueller's Day Off in the theater, and it was the greatest thing. And that movie, Weird Science, Some Kind of Wonderful, these were movies that I just loved watching and growing up to. So they kind of hold a special place in my heart as a movie. But as a music collector, somebody who's got a really large collection of CDs and vinyl, I always love a really good soundtrack. And one thing that has eluded me all these years was a soundtrack to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, because it never came out. They never released one. So this was kind of a fun way to collect not all the tracks from Ferris, but it has pretty much every key track you can think of from that movie in this box set.
Is that something about a certain age when something strikes and hits you that you go, I have got to have that. I've got to own a piece of that somehow? Because I remember that with my first Disney cartoon. It was Sword in the Stone, and I wanted something from Sword in the Stone in the worst way. Then it became I wanted something from Midnight Cowboy, because that was my first X-rated film that I'd ever seen. But I've never had it with music, because I think I've gotten more than enough, and a lot of times I don't listen to music more than once. I know that sounds really terrible, but it's like watching a TV show. I can watch it once, but then we're gone. The thing about John Hughes, though, and I think we've talked about this before, I've interviewed him many times during that 80s period when he was doing all these films, and the people who were in his films thought he was the coolest man ever. Just the coolest guy. He was like that uncle that always had the right record collection and would turn you on to things and make you feel like, oh yeah, I've got to know that too. So does that come through in the music selection?
Absolutely. So a lot of the songs in the box set, and also just from all of his movies in general, kind of come from a certain period. He obviously passed away a number of years ago, but he was a huge music collector. So he would go to the studio, do his thing, leave in the early hours, go to the record store, kind of clean them out. He would be hanging out in, whether it be at home or in his office. He had like records all over the place, cassette. He would make mixtapes. And that's kind of where the name of this album came from, is the John Hughes mixtape, because they found boxes of his mixtapes that he put together kind of with the soundtrack in mind that he wanted to use for the movie. So they pulled the bits and pieces out of this. But you're right, even in the liner notes of this, it talked a lot about the affinity that the actors had toward John, because he was really about maybe 10 years older than a lot of these. So the cool uncle piece really comes through, because I think he was born around 1950, but that Brat Pack era of actors, they were born right around like 1960, right? So, to them as teenagers, here's this guy who's like 25, 30 years old, who has this cool record collection. He had a job. He was an advertising executive for a while, and then like blew that off and got into movies. So he was just this cool guy who, when you're at that age of like in your 20s, late 20s, you feel like you can still connect to younger people, but you're not necessarily a parent yet, so you don't, you're not too restrictive, and you're kind of that cool guy.
It's funny because he looked like somebody who went to an Ivy League school and kind of, if you will, lorded it over you that he had more knowledge than you did. This is just impressions I remember from being around him, but he was always very giving and very friendly. And he would talk about these things, the inspiration. And if I remember right, he would let the actors know about the songs that he wanted to use, so they would be inspired by that music when they're doing the acting. So he was very good at kind of creating an atmosphere that they could get into and understand, and then hopefully project it on screen.
The liner notes of this box set really got in deep into the weeds. So a lot of times when I'll get liner notes in an album, I'll read them, I'll glance through them, but this one really sucked me in because they gave you each and every track in the box, and it would say, such and such song, it came from this movie, this is the scene it was used in, and then they talked to the people that were involved. So it was mostly Tarkan Gach. He was a British music executive. He wrote the bulk of the liner notes, but along with him and a few others, they kind of had the backstory of how these songs came into existence. So one really good example was with She's Having a Baby, which was a very personal story to John Hughes because it was a bit autobiographical with the birth of his son, and it was even in the movie, he was an advertising executive in Chicago, which was a lot like him. So he had planned out this scene and he filmed it, and he had in it a song. It was called Song to the Siren. It was from an obscure music band called Mortal Coil. Okay. So he films it, they've got the music over it, and then at that point they're just like, okay, we got to get the rights. We got to just pay the band and we'll include the movie. So they go to him and they're like, no, we don't want to do it. So they just thought they're playing around, they just want more money. It's John Hughes, he had already made a name for himself. So they're like, all right, just go back and pay him more money. And they're like, no, we don't want that. And then finally it got through to John, and they're like, John, they're not going to accept any level of money. They don't want to do anything that's seen as like commercial because it's unhip. It's not cool. So he was devastated because the entire scene of this movie, it's that end at the hospital when, will the baby survive? Will his wife survive? And so Tarkin says, I'm friends with Kate Bush. Let me talk to her and see if she'll do a song. So he talks to her. They bring her the end clip of the movie, probably on like a VHS tape or something. She watches the scene, composes a song, sings it. They get it back to John, and they're at this point they're thinking we're going to just have to redo it, and nice effort. And it's this beautiful song that they end up laying over it. The only thing he had to do was add in a couple extra scenes because he didn't want to trim the song. He wanted it to run its entire duration. So it ended up into this like wonderful piece of history, but you wouldn't know it without reading these liner notes, the backstory. It was really cool.
That's fascinating. It's weird how when you do see those scenes without any music behind them, how really like this is going to work. Really? I'm not so sure, and then you can get a song that really pulls it together, and it's incredible. It makes a whole difference. I don't know how you as a creator, how you would envision that, especially if you have your mind set on something. Like, how do you regroup after somebody says, no, you're not having our music, we're not doing it? And that ends up being a real problem for some of these films coming out in any kind of other market, because they didn't make a deal with them up front for DVDs or whatever else, streaming, whatever it might be. So sometimes you get those films and they don't have the real music with them, and I think it kills it.
Didn't when they put Married with Children, when they ended up releasing that on DVD years after the show aired on TV, they had to replace the theme song because they didn't have the DVD rights to do it. But
Yeah.
it was really interesting because they, talking about songs, they took the final edit of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and started showing it to test audiences. So originally the plan was to use nothing but like country and western songs. So they had like Steve Earle and Emmylou Harris, and it was going to be nothing but like a country and western soundtrack. And the test came back and they're like, well, they kind of liked the movie, but they hated the music. So they had to go back to the drawing board, and they still use some of them, but then they added in some more kind of popular tunes too to bring it around.
Again, you can look at those movies and you think this is a bomb. I've been at a couple of test screenings for things, and you go, holy man, this is not releasable. And then it ends up being one of the biggest hits because they tweak the right things. And like I say, music is a huge, huge part of that. But well, then what did you find out about Ferris Bueller?
So Ferris Bueller was an interesting one too, because if you watch the credits, right, and it's that song Yellow, the oh yeah, right, that rolls over, right, and they're on the school bus. At the bottom of that, at the very end, almost when they cut back to the scene where Matthew Broderick walks back in, and you're still here, it says like buy the soundtrack to Ferris Bueller's Day Off on cassette and record. And I remember asking for it as a gift for Christmas, and nobody could find it because it never actually existed. They never produced it. So what had happened, what they mentioned in the liner notes, was right around that time. The popular lore is that John Hughes says, well, the soundtrack wouldn't work well as a soundtrack. It's just a collection of songs. It just doesn't make sense to release it. But that's BS, because he did that for every movie up to that point, and he did it with every movie after that point. But what happened was right around that time, he was trying to launch his own music label called Hughes Music. And they think what happened was it was just the timing was terrible. They couldn't release it on Hughes Music because it was still, I think, on Arista, most of those. And it just, they couldn't get the rights worked out. There was a lot of conflict. So it just never came out. He put out a couple 7-inch singles for fan clubs, but that was it. And it was a very popular soundtrack of songs, like, because each of those songs plays so uniquely with different scenes.
I sadly probably have that cassette. I should dig in my archive somewhere, because I do remember that when we did the junket for that, there was something kind of interesting. Now, do you remember anything about the song that was in the parade? Was it Twist and Shout? Was
Twist
that
and Shout? Yeah.
They always have Twist and Shout, or did they have something else?
No, that was kind of planned out. Okay. The funny thing is I think there was actually like another song that they're going to add in. They were going to, like, they did that, and they did Dunkashay, right? But they ended up deciding like this whole scene is getting way too long, and that's fine. So I think they had originally talked about doing maybe another song in the parade. There were also a few other scenes that they were planning to film, and they had songs in mind for them. But the movie, like the original cut of Ferris Bueller, was like 2 hours and 45 minutes. It just went on forever.
Now they'd let them do that.
Yeah. Probably, yeah.
Streaming, we're gonna, just take it up. We can get more ads for that. So yeah, go for it. Well, yeah. That's fascinating, because that was such a huge, huge part of our lives in the 80s. Those films were seminal, I think. And it's funny that somebody hasn't gone back and done something about him. I mean, is there a book about him? Is there a movie about him? Is there something about him that they could easily tie these things to? Because, I think he was at the time as big as Steven Spielberg. Because
he was.
Here's who's influencing a generation. Now, when you look in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't hold up. But at the time, I remember the wait for a John Hughes film. It was like guaranteed it was going to be something you would go to, because he didn't repeat himself, and he was always on the cutting edge of whatever was trendy or current at that time. So if you wanted to be a hip teenager, you had to be part of that whole world.
Yeah, they made a couple interesting notes about that in the liner notes. They talked a little bit about how popular his films were during that time, but he never got the due he probably was deserved, because comedies, they don't get nominated for anything, right? It's just dramas and
Right.
that. So you're Ferris Bueller is not going to get nominated for Best Picture. So that was part of it. And a lot of his films too were actually filmed on pretty small budgets. And if you look at the release of some of those films, he was cranking out like 2 movies a year. It was 85, he did The Breakfast Club and Weird Science. 86, he did Pretty in Pink and Ferris Bueller's. 87 was Some Kind of Wonderful in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And he said, I always have to do a movie, because he was worried that one would bomb and then the studio would say, you're done. So he said, if I'm always working, they can't cancel me.
Yeah, well, you get 3 in those days. You get 3 films.
Right.
You get one, it's a hit. Then you have 2 more that will kind of hold you. But if you're not by the 3rd coming back with another hit, you're out of the business. That's how brutal it was.
Yeah.
Now I think one film and you're out.
Yeah. So he would have like one kind of in post-production or ready to go, and then he'd already be working on the next one. And then the first one would do good. So then it would buy him another film after that. And he was just kind of hopscotching from one to the next. One other interesting point too, from the soundtrack, it only included one song from Vacation, which was Holiday Road by Lindsey Buckingham, which was actually very interesting when you read the notes, because he hated kind of like mainstream rock and roll in a lot of ways. He didn't like Fleetwood Mac. He hated Fleetwood Mac because they were too commercial. But he had Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac do Holiday Road, but he didn't really direct that. He just kind of wrote the screenplay. So that might have been part of it too. But they included that song in the box, which is fun.
And that's the idea that he could write was his biggest success as a director. If he wrote a script, you knew the script was good, and all these other directors who made hay with his work. But whenever he was writing, he would be able to tweak it as he needed to for the film he was trying to produce. I remember one of the young people, and I wish I could tell you who it was. If it was Rob Lowe, Demi Moore, if it was Ali Sheedy or Judd Nelson, I can't remember who it was, said that they thought he was the coolest guy ever, and they looked to him for style. And so I asked him about that. I said, they think that you're kind of like the style setter of all these people, of the Brad Pack, of whomever. And he said, me? I wear the same clothes all the time. I have no sense of style. I am not that person. But if they think I'm cool, that's okay. I'm all right with that. And I found that very fascinating, because he did seem like he was that kid who came home from college, who knew a little bit more than everybody else did. And you looked up to him because he had seen the world, but he wasn't going to volunteer what he had seen. You had to kind of pull it out.
You had asked if anyone had ever did anything on Hughes, a movie or book. The only thing that I could think of offhand was Netflix does a program called The Movies That Made Us, which looks back at films of like the 1980s and pop culture and stuff. So they did one episode on Home Alone. And even though he didn't direct that was a Chris Columbus film. He wrote it, he produced it. And it kind of got into a lot of the background of John Hughes, and because they filmed it at that same abandoned high school that they used for like Ferris Bueller and Breakfast Club and stuff. So they set up offices in there, and I think they used the gym to build sets on it and things like that. So that was kind of interesting. But he was buddies with John Candy, and he didn't show up really to any of the filming except for the one day they had John Candy on set to film his like 2 scenes as, that guy that meets up with Catherine O'Hara at the airport. And it was funny because they said they paid scale for him. So, whatever scale is in 1990-ish, so they worked him for like 20 hours just to get, like 5 minutes of screen time. So they were gonna milk that until the end, and they said John Candy was exhausted. Yeah. So he was exhausted, and then as soon as John Candy was done, John Hughes took off, and Chris Columbus took back over.
Yeah, that is weird. That is weird. But I think they would defer. I really think that was the kind of the way it was with him, even though he was not listed as the director. They have enough of these people who are still around who would make a great documentary. I think somebody should do that and interview the Macaulay Culkins and all these other ones who have been part of that John Hughes world and give people a sense of what it is today, because I don't know that kids today have anything like that. There isn't, one of those kind of filmmakers that you say, it's a must. I've got to go see it. Quentin Tarantino doesn't make enough films to really merit the loyalty, if you will, that somebody like John Hughes engendered. You'd have to go back to the old 40s and 50s to really find somebody else who had that same, yeah, we'll go attitude.
It's interesting when a celebrity dies, I'll have that moment like, that's sad, that he was a great musician, great actor, whatever, but it doesn't really, I don't feel it in any way. The two deaths that I could think of from a celebrity standpoint, because it impacted me in some way. When John Hughes died, I just felt crushed because there was my childhood. And the other one was Michael Crichton, because he was my favorite author. He'd written so many, Jurassic Park I got roped in with that, but movies or books like The Andromeda Strain and Congo and The Terminal Man, Rising Sun. I mean, these were all really good books. And I was devastated by, I think, that death also. And actually, they just discovered some books of his that were written under a pen name, and they're going to re-release them. So I'm excited about that.
You're ready.
But I'm getting ready for like more Michael Crichton books that I didn't even know existed. But it was like those two deaths kind of just hit me hard, because from as a child or as a teenager, these were huge parts of my life, and a lot of other celebrities, it doesn't hit me that way.
Well, can I give you something that I think you should watch?
Sure.
And I know you're going to go, oh, Bruce, please. No, but it's on the Disney Channel and Disney Plus. It's coming up this week, and it's called Prom Pact. And it's about these two friends. It's a boy and a girl who are friends, not romantically, but they're just besties, and I think that's something that we haven't seen for a while. And they decide that they're going to go to prom, which has an 80s theme for its prom. But, you hear about promposals all the time, where how somebody asks somebody to go to the prom. Well, in the film, they do all of these kind of bits from 80s films. So you will see a lot of John Hughes represented in the course of this. And they're very funny, very cool the way they pull off. And I was able to talk with members of the cast, the producers, and a key guest star, but I have an interview here that I think you might like, because it talks all about that.
Prom Pact premieres March 30th on Disney Channel and Disney Plus, and Bruce has interviews with key people from the film. In this first clip, hear from stars Peyton Elizabeth Lee and Blake Draper.
All right, Blake, fill me in. What surprised you most about the United States when you came here?
Ooh. What surprised me most, I think, was when I arrived in Los Angeles for the first time, and I was driving around with Milo, actually, I couldn't believe how many billboards there were. That's just, which is, I guess, must be strange, but in Australia, we just don't have that many billboards of films and television shows. So that was kind of jarring to be like, wow, this is really a town built on entertainment. So,
are you on one now? Are you guys on one now yet?
I think
we're
we
on a couple.
Yeah. So it's
you have to get over there and pose with it. That's the deal.
Yeah, no, I was at the shopping mall recently, and I popped up on one of the screens there, and it was kind of a jump scare. And
so Peyton, have you been teaching him everything? Are you now his tutor in this too?
His tutor in fame.
Never made it out. If anything, I'm tutoring her.
Yeah. I have. I needed a lot of work.
Yeah, she needs some work.
No, I mean, I don't know enough to tutor anyone in anything.
But now they're also putting you with Milo in Doogie, right?
Yes.
Do you ever get rid of him?
I try my very best and fail at every point.
he is a force that needs to be tamed at some point.
Yes,
And
I
I
do
think-
my best.
No,
I
never
do my
tame
best.
Milo.
I
do
think
my
it's
best.
your job. But you know,
That's
Mandy and
great.
Doogie are kind of alike, aren't they?
Sorry?
Aren't Mandy and Doogie kind of alike?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think they're both very strong, smart, independent women. And I just feel so lucky to be able to play both of them. And I guess if I can play a strong, smart woman authentically, then it must mean something about me.
Maybe.
Is she
Probably
really
not.
like that, or is she just really out of it when you see her off the screen? This is for you, Blake.
Hey,
This is yeah.
She is really out of it. She's been on screen. She's a mess.
Don't tell them.
No kidding, Peyton. No psych.
No,
Peyton's amazing. She shares a lot of similarities with the characters that she plays.
Smart.
So
All
she's
those-
Let's evade you.
pretty smart, you know. She is a smart lady. She's independent. She's very strong. She's very headstrong, which I've definitely learned.
The hard way.
I learned the hard way, but no, I've taken a lot from Peyton, and yeah, she's amazing.
Peyton said, "Off the set. I want him off the set now." Is that what she does? Yeah. Great.
Yep, definitely.
Mhm.
I was shocked though, Blake, that you didn't know how to play basketball.
This is my first time. It's my first time learning it. Luckily
So
for me though, sorry, go.
Is it easy?
It's not easy. I've
For some.
already forgotten how to play because I haven't touched a basketball since I was last on set. But luckily for me, my older brother is an amazing basketballer, so he actually helps coach me, which was really, really fun. And
And what did he think? Did he think you were any good?
I think he was worried at the start, but he put a lot of time and effort into me, so he helped me out. But I had a few other coaches, in
Me being
Melbourne,
one of them.
Peyton, and in Vancouver as well. So yeah,
And did you use the beef method?
I did actually. Yeah, I did, and it kind of helped.
Right.
Graham had a point, and it helped me as Blake being Graham. Wow, it's very meta, isn't it?
Peyton, this really kind of conjures a lot of John Hughes talk, I think.
Yeah.
Did you see it? Did you see that kind of sense of connection?
For sure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was raised on John Hughes movies. My mom loves the 80s, the music, the clothes, the movies. And so all of it was very infused into my upbringing. So it was really exciting to get to sort of keep the spirit of the 80s rom-com alive and then, you know, make some adjustments so that it makes sense in a 21st century world. But yeah, it was so much fun to get to dive into that sort of feeling.
Were you surprised by the little more adult tone that this took from other Disney films?
I don't know if I was surprised. I was excited about it. You know, I think kids these days are so smart and they're not to be underestimated. And I think it is our job to create content that speaks authentically to what it is to grow up today, what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. And so I don't know if it's more grown up, but it's just more truthful. But it was very exciting for me because I think that's very important.
Yeah, definitely. Blake, if I said get your head in the game, would you know what I was talking about?
In basketball? High School Musical?
Did you see she tutored you on that answer?
Thank you.
I could see that.
I do love High School Musical though.
needs
High School
me.
Musical is
He
amazing.
needs
I vividly remember seeing the last
you
film.
vividly remember.
No, the last one when it came,
Please.
High School Musical 3.
I remember my older brother telling me about it, right? Is that how it goes? Hey, thank you guys so
I'm your
much.
older brother.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
In this second clip, hear an interview with another star of the show, Margaret Cho.
Margaret, what was your high school guidance counselor like?
Gosh, I don't even know if I met with my high school guidance counselor. I can't remember. I mean, it didn't make an impression on me to the point where I can say who it even was. But the one person in high school that really believed in me was I had a high school theater teacher who would sign me up for open mic comedy nights when I was a really young teenager with my comedy partner at the time, who was Sam Rockwell, who's a very famous actor. So we were a comedy duo, and she would sign us up because we were too young to sign up. So she would call the club and put in our names, and then we would go. We were like 15, so young. But what an amazing vote of confidence. And it set me off on a career, and him too, I guess, for sure.
I think something happened to him, didn't it? I think there's a
Very
little something there.
well.
Well, today she could get arrested for doing something like that, you know?
Yeah, it's very different. You know, it's a very different time, but she was a young woman. She was like in her 20s, you know, and she just saw such a energy in me and in Sam, and you know, kind of gave us a lot of encouragement, and really tested us to like, okay, why don't you challenge this by going and doing something at a nightclub? And so, you know, and she was there to chaperone, to make sure it didn't get weird. So she was like the responsible adult throughout, but at the same time was giving us this idea of opportunity, which was really important.
How good were the two of you as a team? Were you good?
I don't really remember. I think we were just so young that people were just kind of like, what is going on? Who are these
What
kids?
is this, right?
What even is it? You could see there's footage of it on YouTube of some of our stuff that we would do. And so ridiculous and funny, but it's also like just trying things out. You know, when you're a kid, that's sort of what high school is about.
You know, I remember when you were the queen of ABC and when All American Girl came out, and that was going to be a big game changer. And now this year we hear about Everything Everywhere as a big game changer. Is it?
It is. It's great. It's really exciting. I want to see more Asian American participation in film and television, in arts in general. You know, it's really exciting. I think, you know, it's a long time coming for sure, but I'm so proud that we get to sort of see ourselves in film. And this film, Prom Pact, also features and centers on an Asian American woman who is forging a path. And, you know, to me, that's really exciting.
Did you, when they approached you about this, did you say, well, I would be what? You know, I mean, did you see that the guidance counselor would be your role?
Well, I was just offered the role, but I was really excited to do it. I wanted to work with Peyton again. I'd done her show Doogie last year, which I really was impressed by her acting, her ability, and her innovative genius when it comes to approaching these roles. And, you know, I was excited to work with her. And the role was written as a queer guidance counselor, which I thought was really interesting and really cool. So I really was excited to do it.
Did you talk with her at all about, you know, the business? Did you give her any advice?
Oh, she doesn't need advice from me. She's doing great. You know, she's like, so I was looking for advice for me because I think I learned so much from younger people on how the industry has changed and how things are really different. You know, we're looking at social media differently, and they really have so much to offer to like somebody like me who's trying to learn about what new stuff is going on.
You know, when this show makes a big deal about 80s films, what did you think when those 80s films were out? Did you say, oh my God, yeah, that's really great? Or were you looking at them and saying, you know, they're really not showing the picture?
Well, I loved it because they were what we had, you know, and I remember going to the first showing of Pretty in Pink at our local theater where I was growing up, and it was so exciting because you had just a film that was about being a teenager, which I think was just so great. And the coolest adult, which is Annie Potts, is great in the movie. And so I was really channeling Annie Potts in Prom Pact because I think that's kind of the right sort of like character that sort of mind matches.
Well, I hope this is the start of a lot of things for you because I miss you. I don't see you enough.
Yes, we need more of me.
And finally, in this third clip, executive producer Julie Bowen, known for her role on Modern Family, is joined by director Anya Adams.
Julie, what did you learn about producing? What did this teach you?
I learned a lot. I learned that producers work much harder than actors and get paid less. That's what I learned. And I have a lot of respect for them, and I will never complain again.
Did you find, though, that now I understand some of the choices they make? You know, like when you say, I didn't get cast in this because,
Well, casting is definitely something that I've done some directing before, so I was more familiar with that process, and definitely learned to take casting less personally after being on the other side. You realize that there's so many forces at play. It's not always the best actor. You're figuring out a whole ecosystem and how it's going to work. I think I really figured out that there's a lot of, you've got a partner like Disney who's great. And there's a lot of, you've got to meet a lot of different needs, and a lot of it, from the people on the set to the highest levels. And sometimes there's compromises that don't make sense to somebody who's just standing on set like I used to do.
But it makes sense. It makes sense. For both of you, this is a little more adult than most Disney films. And there's a specific area that I could reference, but I don't want to reference. How do you get by with that?
You want to take that, Anya?
I mean, Disney, I feel like Disney wanted to do this movie because they also are trying to really grow their teen, mid kind of range viewership and really dig into that. And this was a way to do it. I mean, when you look at the other stuff that's out there for teens, it is a little bit more grown up, and they are exposed to a lot more things on the internet and on their phones. And so it's like this movie, I think, had a real strong Disney feel, but we tried to elevate it and just bring it into kind of the present day, as it were, and blaze a trail for Disney into this.
Yeah, Disney wants to grow with its audience. They have such a solid base in the Disney Channel, but then when you're moving into Disney Plus and you have the whole family watching, it's not inappropriate to have references to some more mature subject matter. So we did.
I was saying, and I don't know if I got cut off, but I love the idea that there was a boy-girl friendship, but it didn't have to lead to romance. I thought that was a really cool kind of aspect of the film, and I hope that's a lot. I hope that happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that was really important. When I read the script, I was like, I don't see this. I don't see a lot of, hetero kids being friends, male, female. You just don't see that. And I think it's something that is a reality in the world. And you can have friends with the opposite sex and support each other and love each other and be in a friendship. And I think Peyton and Milo crafted it beautifully.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's too much pressure, if you will. You can't just be friends. It's got to lead to something else. But
yeah.
Do you two remember promposals? I never had that in my day, but I'm ancient, so there you go.
No, I think that these are pretty recent. I have my own theory, and that is that they came along with social media and the rise of the smartphones in the late, aughts. Because before that, you weren't doing big splashy things because you weren't trying to record them and show them on social media. But I could be wrong.
Well, how are you asked to prom? Somebody comes up to you and says, "Would you like to go to prom with me?" And that was it?
Well,
I was back in the passing note stages. I mean, I wrote my prom date a letter because he lived in another city and had to fly in for it, and he did, and it was amazing. But I think if you're in a high school back in the day, you were like writing a letter, or you had your friend go ask. It was very contained.
And I went to a boarding school. We didn't have a prom, so I got to avoid that altogether.
Oh no, this is your prom then. This is it.
All the better, right? It's my wish fulfillment.
There's also a very John Hughes vibe to this film. Did you plan that, or is it just because of the times?
100% planned.
It was absolutely planned in the script and in the development. We wanted to reference it. We wanted to say that those movies left us feeling really good, but then upon reflection, have some really problematic stuff. And we needed a director who could put all of that together in a visual language. And Anya did a great job.
All right, Bruce, thanks for that interview.
Be sure to watch Prom Pact. It's on both Disney Channel and it's on Disney Plus. But I must tell you, the Disney Channel version has been sanitized for your protection. So you're not going to get the kind of the dirty references where they actually go John Hughes on you in the Disney Plus version. So watch that one and you'll get some things where you go, oh, I didn't realize that Disney did these kind of things, but they do. And look in the background of everything, because you'll see promposals that are not meant to be overt. They're just ones that you as a fan of 80s films would be able to catch the reference.
Sounds good, Bruce. So we'll be back again next week with another episode of Streamed and Screened.